All right, thank you all for coming tonight to our author series. We started a writing group here about a year and a half ago? In the fall of 22. And since then, we meet every week at 7 o'clock. We just do writing prompts and things like that. It's a lot of fun. And we're a small, pretty small but mighty group of like anywhere from 6 to 10 people every week. But in that year and a half, 3 people in our group have become published authors. That's pretty good for Ashburnham, right? Yeah, and more of us on the way, right? Yeah. So, and then whose idea was it? Was it Melissa's idea to do the author night? Yeah, to do an author night. And we started that about a year ago, maybe. We were a few months in, and we've had some amazing authors, not only local, but have come from other states who have come to read and things like that. So it's really been a terrific series. Ashburnham's kind of becoming poetry central, so Jonathan is going to add to that tonight. And just a word, New Dawn is fairly new, actually. We just, it's been in development for a couple of years, but this center is currently, we're trying to meet the funding for a state grant that we got late last year. We need to match that grant by next year to fulfill the buying of the building. We're all excited about that. So, after you buy one of Jonathan's books, if you have a couple bucks left over and you want to put it in that red donation can over there, that'd be great. Every little bit helps. So thank you for that. Thank you for coming to New Dawn, and please welcome our poet from Worcester, Jonathan Blake.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming as well. This is a new book. This is my first book. I'm going to do something a little bit different. There's my coach who's telling me louder.
Thank you. That's good. You're going to be right up on that mic.
Okay. I'm going to read from this, but I'm going to do so later on. I want to do a few things because lately, to promote the book, I've got a kind of a script down, and I'm starting to get tired of it. And there are a couple of new poems that I've written, a couple of them for people in our lives who've recently died. Generally, I tell my students, once you get a poem, put it away. Let it ripen. So I'm going to break that code tonight because I have a poem that I've written in the past month for a friend who recently died. As a matter of fact, less than a week ago. He is largely responsible for my putting this book out, because if he hadn't pushed me and he hadn't prodded me and he hadn't said, you need to do it, you need to do it, you need to do it, I probably wouldn't have done it. I was less interested in putting a book of my poems together than just spending time fishing for poems. You'll hear some of those poems later. So, this doesn't have a title. And I felt when I was thinking about this morning, I said to myself, you want to start off so darkly, but I'm going to do it anyway. Andre is dying. I spoke to him on the phone today, watching the bright forsythia beyond our windows sway in a slow spring wind. Often there was a stillness between our words, and we listened to each other's breathing. It was enough, all we needed. He told me he loved me. His voice was the bare whisper of winter. And another friend we were just talking about died within the past year of COVID. He had MS, he was compromised and such. He was a man of few words, very shy, very withdrawn, but he was a wonderful tenor saxophonist. So The book is called In the Kingdom. This is talking about going back. Am I imagining it? And when I reference Z, his name was John Zaganowitz. He was a tenor saxophone, but he comes in at the end of the book. I've come back to the kingdom again, leaving my perch on the rusted fire escape at the edge of the city. The window open for Coltrane's soft tenor behind the voice of Johnny Hartman. Left the lush life of the city and the pigeon who is patient with me each morning, listening to my dreams. Leaving the voices of lament that lift from the alley, from the streets, leaving the last cigarette in the dead geranium's pot, the groaning buses and the clouds of black exhaust hovering in the air behind them, leaving the small square of sunlight I inhabit between 7:42 and 9:12 each morning, tilting my face into that light, forgetting my sadness, imagining my return to this long valley. One crow, an echo on the far shore. Two young kayakers whose talk is bright with love as they make their way across the sky reflected on bright water. The hummingbirds in the hemlock, the soft trill of the crickets in the shadows along the path down to the still waters of the cove. I stand at dusk on the shore listening. The soul of Z's saxophone, a memory filling my heart. His COVID death, the end of his breath, his song no more. Remembering how the long stillness after each solo was like a small reckoning. Yes, I've come back again, returned once more to the kingdom. Is anybody familiar with John Hodgson? John Hodgson? No? Okay, well, Ashburnham has Poetry Central here. John Hodgson is from Shrewsbury. He has several books out. He's a very, very kind, gentle man, a fine poet, and he is the master of illusions. So if you read his poems, he's going to bring you out from all sorts of places. So this is called Tagged, and it's a very recent poem in the past year for John Hodgson. And I had to dedicate it to him because all of a sudden my mind was clicking with these illusions that I was making. Jesus loves Darlene. Why did the Lord and Savior love Darlene, I wondered first on my morning walk, when suddenly it occurred to me, not Jesus, but a young man named for him loves Darlene. That's what the enormous red and black bordered letters exclaimed on the rustling trestle of iron above the rail yard. Tracks twisting and turning in all directions out of town like a difficult farewell, like a map to nowhere or anywhere but here. The high-pitched song of metal on metal, like the sudden rising of starlings at the edge of the city, lifting into the bare trees, the discordant conversations between them like the murmuring voices of the mind. I imagined a troubled artist, a young man broken by his fair-haired beauty, broken and desperate for love, for the world to know his devotion was real, was true enough for him to hang like one of the Walendas, poised and balanced above the dangerous earth, defying the laws of gravity one moonlit night, spraying can after can of paint, each song, each long hiss the song of the serpent, a modern-day Michelangelo making his own chapel of love, the quiet light of dawn growing brighter and brighter, a cacophony of noise beginning in the yards, his heart an engine, fierce and full, doubt no longer the darkness of night, doubt no longer alive, doubt no longer in the fair-haired and beautiful heart of Darlene. I don't even know where that poem came. I'm serious. It just appeared this morning. We'll talk more about that later. This is about the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont as well, and was written up there. Gleefully foolish. I'm sitting in the sunlight of the kingdom naked again, believing I will live forever. That the heat and the book of poems I hold, the first cup of strong coffee, are essential to the myth of my eternal life. That the stillness and the smell of mountain water and the potted basil moving in the morning breeze will be enough. That the great blue, like a monk in the reeds of the cove, knows the way. There's a butterfly on the branch. There are shadows and stones. There's the talk of 3 crows atop the trees and echoing across the valley. There are lily pads by the small dam where the fish stir slowly in the darkness. Always there is the timeless tale of the old snapper rising to the surface, floating for a few bright moments in the sky on the water. In the palm of my hand, I hold the last 2 strawberries wet with morning. I hum a little to myself before I close the book and rise to turn slowly in the sun. In my old age, how gleefully foolish I am, how wonderfully foolish, stepping outside of time, dancing with my shadow, forgetting the terrible sorrows of the world. Andre was also responsible for putting this anthology together. I don't know if does Worcester Magazine come up here? No? Does it? You can find the story online. Way back in the, what they call them, the aughts now, way back in the 80s, a bunch of us in Worcester decided we were going to do an artist cooperative, which we did. Kind of like what you're doing here. And put on a whole bunch of different kinds of shows and readings and galleries. I mean, you never knew what was going to come. Andre, a few years ago, got the idea to put an anthology together. We ran a poetry series there for more than a few years. And he decided he wanted to put an anthology together of the poets from that artist cooperative who had read on the stage. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from this. This poem is called Vigilance. My friend tells me he's been waiting for days, has painted nothing. Each time I visit, it's as if he's never moved, though he assures me his life continues. Good harvest meals from his dying garden, the simple pleasure of washing dishes, car repairs, and unexpected phone calls, making slow love with his wife. He tells me the waiting is necessary, that the light moves with grace across the small table where one branch of blossom stands in the blue bottle, that he waits for the petals to have just the right color of dying, that particular beauty of what will fall in its own sweet time, how the spirit is revealed, the decorative left behind. He insists there's only one moment like this for each living thing, that he must wait to paint the magnificence in the moments after suffering. People always want to know what your favorite season is, what's your favorite month, so on. I think I've decided September is my favorite. In praise of September. In the stillness of mid-morning, the man begins his meditation on loss, its weight in our lives, what can't be seen in the wind lifting lush branches of green that begin to burn toward autumn, the old heart knowing September's tradition of sadness, the ghosts that whisper melancholy like the doves at dawn. We must take measure of what is abundant as well, he thinks. The brightness of his wife's voice as she returns from errands and walks into the kitchen. The smell of mint picked weeks ago, now steeping in hot water. The cold snap of metal that signals letters from old friends who live close to the sea. He sings quietly about the moon splintered by the dark pines in the early morning, shadows like ancient texts he studied happily on the bedroom wall before rising into the morning's slow bloom of light. And harvest, he thinks, 2 large blue bowls of ripe tomatoes, cut basil standing in the glass vase, cloves of garlic on the cutting board close to the shining knives, Coltrane's tenor floating through the warming rooms of late summer, and the work, he smiles, shaking his head, the work that remains to be done. Thelonious Monk, the great Bach jazz pianist and composer, entitled one of his compositions, Blue Monk. This occurs in Worcester, and it's a poem about living in the heart of the city, which is, you'll hear why Andre and a few of us lived there. We did because the rent was very, very, very cheap. And it also, we lived in the only remaining brownstones in Worcester, which used to be part of an all-girls school called Castle Kell, but has since become a different place, now known as Main South in Worcester. And if you go to Worcester and you say to someone, I'm going to Main South, they're going to look a little bit aghast at you, and you'll get some of that from this. Blue Miles, for Miles Davis. Not blue, but kind of blue was my heart in those early years on Castle Street, lying on the broken couch in the bay window of my brick row house. The music, a new tenderness I was discovering as the dirty light fell through the torn and yellowed shades, and the old man in his garden of tomatoes across the street whistled softly and wished good late afternoon to the junkies walking like the dead up the street to the park where they would fix, nod on the grass under the unblemished blue of Worcester, sunlight warming their gray faces, lighting their dreams, before an indigo blue held a bright rising moon over the darkening tenements, and Miles' muted trumpet whispered into a breathless stillness, and even love seemed possible. So if you're interested in looking at this anthology, there are some poems in here by Andre Juarez, as well as many others from Worcester at this particular time. So generally what I've been doing is I'm going to read the postscript first, so you get a sense. And the title came of the book because the family has some property up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. And it's a valley that is quiet and still, full of wildlife. We were just up there 3 weeks ago. We sleep on a screen porch up over the water. I got up to go outside to go to the bathroom. I came back to bed. And all of a sudden, I thought I heard this heavy footstep coming up the stairs from the water, and I couldn't figure that out. And neighbors are few and far between. And I looked up, and there was nothing on the stairway. And I looked to the left, and there seemed to be this great black curve that I couldn't quite figure out what it was until I sat up further. And it was the biggest bear I've ever seen, 10 feet from our bed, on the deck, just nosing around. And so the next weekend, my niece and her partner and their baby, they went up, and I said, there's a bear up there, so you better just be alert. And of course, I said, it's a big bear. And she said, I have bear spray. I said, your bear spray is not going to do anything to this bear other than antagonize it. He went out with the dog the next morning after they got there. And who comes lumbering out of the swamp but the bear? And he said that bear was 400 or 500 pounds. And he's an outdoorsman. He's a hunter and everything else. He was shocked. But the bear went away. So far, so good. 40 some odd years, have not seen a bear. Moose, all sorts of other kinds of things. Have not seen a bear. In 1984, my parents purchased a small log cabin overlooking a pond in a sparsely inhabited valley at the end of a long dirt road in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. In time, with the coming of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the family built another cabin to accommodate the gatherings of the tribe. The rolling hills of the pastures on the horizon, the wildlife, a stillness needed for dreaming, have long been the wellspring for my writing. In the late 1980s, after a visit to the family cabin, the poet Bill O'Connell named the place Paradise. It remains a place where poems and peace can be found. So, what you're going to hear is a lot of water and a lot of other kinds of things. That's not all that's in the book, but Letter to Elizabeth, away in France. I've wondered all day what might be important enough to tell. Certainly last night, the gray day growing darker and me without sadness. At dusk, two blue herons, slow and prehistoric along the stillness at the center of the pond. The haunting cry of doves. And with morning, the world brilliant again, whispering what grows old in us. Points of sunlight like diamonds spilled across water. One slow tractor turning yesterday's hay where the earth meets the sky. Summer's wind lifting the heavy branches. To know my heart now, summon the smell of water at dawn. The quiet voices of a father and son fishing among the fallen trees close to the far shore. The sudden power of last night's rain. This is just, I guess it becomes a description just of the valley. And it has an epigraph by the poet Charles Wright. Wherever you are is a monastery. Dark wings of hemlock slow in the morning wind. Saplings of maple and oak. A sudden war along the tops of trees. One crow banished by two. And then a return to the singing in the forest of the far shore. A stillness in the valley blemished by these words. Yet how else to say there is a luminous yellow-green in the newly hayed fields of the horizon. The young men have moved on to new pastures. That the sky is the color of wet slate above those fields. The air so thick it shapes us like the breath of God. And the wind gently rocking a boat waiting on silver water. So, my friend Bill O'Connell and I have this metaphor for when we're writing, and we call it fishing. We're just fishing. And when I teach creative writing, I'm often giving my students prompts to get them started, to have them begin, because they're not sure where to go. And I tell them often, I said, there's no way I could work this way. I can't work towards a prompt or something like that. It's never been the way. I just like to sit and wait for things to happen, fishing. And we got this metaphor from the poet William Stafford, the Northwestern poet, who's no longer with us except for his words, who would talk about just waiting for that nibble of language to come and then to follow it and let it go. So oftentimes I'll be sitting above the water on the deck, more often than not in the morning, and there will be actual fishermen who will be coming by. And I'm thinking, well, I'm looking at them, I know what they're doing, but I'm thinking, what are they thinking I'm doing? Are they? And sometimes people have seen me at the end of the dock and they will come by and they say, oh, you had to bring your work with you? I said, no, this isn't work. Oh, you're just writing? I said, yeah, just trying to write. Oh, okay. The fisherman and the poet. comes with an epigraph from William Stafford. What the river says, that's what I say. Here in the kingdom, we are brothers in waiting. The man standing in his skiff in the cove below, the whip whistle of his line, the percussion of his lure on sunlit water. On the hill above, I turn the pages of Bill Stafford's poems, waiting, pen and pad close by like a net to be lifted from the dark, waiting to hold the gleaming and thrashing body. So my fish is a little bit different than theirs. And you can't put my fish on a scale, but
it still has weight.
Oh,
There you go.
oh, and you know what? And it gleams and it thrashes, you know? Oh, and so when O'Connell and we've been writing to each other since graduate school, so it's about 40 years now, on a weekly basis pretty much, writing letters to each other, handwritten letters. But every now and then, a line will come and say, caught one this morning, put it in the creel, put it away. Got another one. This one I threw back, wasn't that good. But so the metaphor continues there. This is actually a poem from when we lived in Fitchburg. Elizabeth taught at Applewild School along with Dottie. And we had a beautiful, it was one of the old mansions that had been converted into faculty housing, students, apartments for the faculty housing. And we could walk out of our kitchen and there was a beautiful stone porch right there. And the people who lived down would let their horses out. And the horses would come into the pasture. And I mean, I just thought it was marvelous. You get to sit there and have breakfast and the horses are running and they're so free to be out in the barn. This is called Two Horses. Two horses thunder into the sun at the center of the pasture. What cries come deep from their magnificent bodies fill the sky. I love to watch them when they first charge from the dark barn into sunlight, tossing their great heads, pushing aside the strong spring wind. I love to feel the earth tremble as they run along the old stone walls. I love to walk out under lush maples and watch them finally come to rest, their brown bodies shining, their two heads close in the stillness they have made, their soft breathing loud enough so I may never forget. I often talk to my students at some point in the semester, usually in the beginning, and I pose this question to them: who's responsible for your joy? Because we talk a lot about human condition. Welcome to your suffering. That's what this will be. Pain, all of that stuff. That's the contract of humanity. Who's responsible for your joy? And most of them say, I am. Damn it, I am. Great. But you have to be ready to embrace it as well. And sometimes it's going to come upon you. So, this is a very short poem, but I was trying to, as I was thinking about that, give a sense of physicality to joy. Not intellectualizing it, but just the physicality. It's called joy. Some days there's no explaining it. Like shorebirds rising all at once from the mud flats of my bones. Trying to be tender. Raising his thin t-shirt over his head, my father asked me to change the dressing on his back where death's black root has taken hold of one more mole. It has come to this again between us, the ritual of tender care. My hands, now middle-aged, gently pulling the old bandage off the soft, milky skin, cleaning the wound left by the surgeon's scalpel, pressing the back of my father's head forward so the skin will tighten, the new bandage hold true. What I wonder, as I pull his shirt slowly over my careful work, is whose death do I now know better, his or my own? I know you're tired of this one, but I'm going to read this one. Glad you think it's inaccurate in its description. So, a month or two ago, I prefaced this whole thing by telling the audience I suffer from puritanical guilt. It's just unavoidable. All right? Leisure, and yet all I want to do is sit around and read and write and do that kind of stuff. And as I've told more than one audience, it's even more weighty on you when your wife gets up and goes across the street to go teach and go work. And I'm just sitting around saying, this is the life. But then the guilt starts to come in. So it comes with some epigraphs and some lines. I'm in love with ancient Asian poetry, especially the poets of the Tang Dynasty, Po, Tu Fu, Wang Wei. So we get some of that here. 2 lessons. This is an epigraph from Po Chu Yi. Tired of my writing brush, I gazed out the windows. I am alone. She will return in the darkness of late afternoon, weary, maybe even sad. I will try not to be so happy it hurts. All day she lures her students back to the board, away from the windows, scolding those who do not pay attention. My chair sits facing out over the valley, sunlight on new snow, smoke rising from the village chimneys. In this empty room, the quiet of the heart. Occasionally, I will turn a page, sometimes close my eyes. When she returns, I will read her poems from the Tang. Wang Wei writes, what's a man of peace to do all day? Du Fu asks, how many times in one man's life can he listen to heaven's music? We had gardens on this porch that I'm talking about. And a friend who was, her husband was a colleague of Elizabeth's, and he got a different job, and they moved away. And they had this beautiful carved face outside that we had always vocalized admiration for, and so on and so forth. So this is called Totem for Rose. Some mornings my wife kneels in the bed of flowers close to the stone porch, believing he sings to her. Like old music, his is written into the silence we carry with us. His dark and weathered face, a spirit carved into walnut grain. When our neighbor moved away, she was filled with sorrow. We found him leaning against the granite cornerstone, a note left pinned to our door. He belongs here with you. My friend mistakes his expression for eternal pain, eyes half closed, lips twisted as if just before some terrible song of mourning. I explain it's not the ruin of the soul he sees, not among the stargazers and the wild mint, the tulips and the iris. I tell him my wife believes a different story, one older than the myth of our exile. She says each garden is passage into paradise, this face reminder of our rapture. Here's another Castle Street poem. After great rolls of thunder and the flash crack of lightning, children lean from the brick bay windows of tenement brownstones, listening to the rain. This poem is, we figured out, or I finally figured out, this poem is 30 some odd years. So, because the main character in the poem you'll hear about was 10, I guess, because she's now 40. Song for Natalie. Tired and overcome with the delicate perfume of lilac, I sink into my chair. Cold wine and a pale spring moon. Suddenly, Natalie, my neighbor's young daughter, is running into the coming darkness, shouting angrily that she is old enough, old enough, old enough. She has not noticed the moon, is not drunk with lilac in the dying lavender sky, does not know that she is not old enough, but that with each step into the terrible darkness, she moves closer to that moment when she too will stagger into the face of beauty, the heart knowing its burden, when the brilliant moon and the sweet lilac and the quiet night are enough. I've said this many times, and it still is a paradox to me. Many of these poems wrestle. The paradox is that I spend a lot of time using words, trying to depict those times when we are comfortable not using words. And I didn't know that. I just discovered it when the book finally came together, and I said, wait a minute, there's a lot of times when I'm talking about, get the words out of here, just let it be, let it be. This is called Voyage, and this I actually observed. A long marriage. How long has it taken them to arrive at this understanding? Him at the prow of their skiff, tall, thin, white beard lit by the sun, looking out like an explorer, reeling his taut line from the water. Her turning the quiet motor every now and then with her left foot, seated on the pedestal chair to the rear, setting their direction, bending her head again as if in prayer when she returns to the open book in her lap. The two of them moving slowly into shadow, into light, shadow, and light again. All morning like this, no words between them. Devotion. Like the burnished body of Jesus worn smooth with kisses on the cross my grandmother carried. Taking shape. We don't choose love. It chooses us. Is too big for us in the beginning, but takes our shape in time, like a fire that reduces itself to red heat, like a storm suddenly more than the sky, becoming the powerful maples swaying like women, like men drunk with love, as long rolls of thunder move over the valley. Like a sudden explosion of swallows in the cool morning, trying to keep form above the pond, finding new shape in the dark shadows of the barn. We have no control of the magnificence in our lives, no determination for what flowers in us like wild blossoms that are fragrant in the darkness of the spirit, for the tenderness that casts delicate shadows in the white light of the heart. Here's another short one, but it's, again, about, do we need words? But I'm always trying to find words to describe. It's called Portrait. It's about the moments we get stunned into silence, or sometimes we're just very, very comfortable and not having to say anything to anybody. Portrait. Each of you without words, your shadow and you standing on the moonlit path. David Thoreen wrote a beautiful on the back. He's professor of English at Assumption University. One of his lines, which I always found, he dares to imagine his own impermanence. I found that kind of strange. But don't we all, I guess? So I often use this as an example of one of those fishing moments, because this poem, I had no idea where it was going to go. The poem's title, the title of the poem came at the end. I didn't know what to call the poem, and then finally I realized it's called The Day After My Death. From the stillness, the sound of one boat being pushed over stones into water. Fog lifting from the valley as the sun grows stronger, shimmers on the slow current of the pond. In the cool shadows of the pines, the measured mourning of doves. A single bell becoming a bright silence. Far out, an oarless boat burning. And the poem began, my nieces were going out in the canoe, and they started to push. It was very quiet. It's always often very quiet there. And they were beginning to push the canoe out over the stones. And that sound got me. And then I just followed it until I got the end. It's like, oh, this is like a Viking burial. Which isn't a bad thing. All right, I will close with two poems. There's one I always like to read because I always challenge my students with this. They don't know what to write, and I say to them, well, what you really ought to do is write a moon poem. And they often look at me quite quizzically and say, a moon poem? A moon poem? What are you talking about? And I said, it's a tradition since the beginning of humankind that you write a moon poem. August moonrise. Like a young woman averting her gaze, the pale pearl face of the moon rises over black pines, becomes less coquettish in the open sky. Her lost twin trembles on dark water. I often challenge them as well. We talk about writing in form, and I describe the haiku as being one of the toughest nuts to crack. And they're like, 5, 7, 5, what are you talking about? You just count the syllables and you just write a haiku. I said, okay, go ahead, write a haiku. This came from an actual conversation I had, and then because we're talking about the great haiku artists in the poem, I said, well, I'm going to have to write a haiku. So it begins with a haiku. It's called Longing Late Spring for Yucca. Rain begins again. Birds build nests beneath the eaves. How still my heart is. Last night, I stood above the pond with a woman from Japan who said she knew how poems could be found here. This morning, she returned to Boston, and I am alone. Only the moon in memory as it climbed through the hissing trees into a sky suddenly free of storm. Drinking cold wine, we said the names of Basho, Busan, Isa like a prayer. We might have said crickets, night birds, shadows born from a pale northern light. Her small body swayed like a thin reed in the night breeze, and she leaned closer to a moon older than any homeland either of us knows. Yucca said, the songs of birds at dusk are poems. Moonlight does not break the grass. I'm far from home, but in Japan, the sound of distant bells echoes in my heart. Thank you.
Are you going to talk about the cover art?
Oh,
First question, cover art.
Well,
it's extremely important.
He usually does.
Okay, I forgot. This is not a photograph, as some have said. Oh, that's a wonderful photograph in your book. It's actually a painting by our niece, Vanessa. Oh, wow is right. Wow is right. So it really captures the nuance. It's called Creekside, but she's very, very talented. And we were happy that she had something in the film.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See, I do what I'm
So we have a few minutes if people want to ask questions.
Yes.
Do you, your shorter poems, do you ever feel or go back to them at some point and want to continue that thought or poem?
Rarely.
Very really?
Yeah. If you can, I've fallen in love a long time ago with Asian poetry, and if you can hit in those 2, 3, 4 lines, I've told. Well, this. I don't know if I should read this poem. No, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna do what I. Forgive me. Yeah. Okay. There it is. All right. So I use this poem to speak to my students about the necessity and the power of illusion. How an illusion can do a lot of work for you. I don't know if this is going to even come close to answering your question. Let me just read the poem without the title. Night darkens the river, 2 moons shining. Opening one more bottle of wine, I walk to the water's edge and pull my boat ashore. So that has that kind of sensibility. Right? This is the title of the poem. You have to know the legend of Li Po. Remembering the legend of Li Po's death. So Li Po is perhaps considered one of the greatest Tang Dynasty poets. Li Po liked his wine. And the myth of his death is that he went out in his boat after having imbibed a considerable amount of wine. And he leaned over to kiss the moon on the surface of the water, and he fell in and drowned. That's the myth. I don't know if it's true. You know, you can't Google this and figure it out. So this actually just occurred. And the title came afterwards. But after, a few glasses of any intoxicant, we sometimes can do really stupid stuff that we regret afterwards, right? Or maybe perhaps you don't know. I do. So I looked, and you could be tempted. Nice still water, and there's the boat, and it's night. Hey, let's go for a boat ride. And I was alone at when this poem came. And I said to myself, that's probably not a good idea. So I went down and pulled it up. Where I was going with that is that I thought this was going to be a much longer poem. I was going to bring in Li Po and everything else. And I had a lot of lines with it. And sometimes cutting is harder than adding. And I said, no, it doesn't need all of that extraneous stuff. What it needs is this right there. So I rarely do that, but I'm not going to say I never do it. You know, I tell my students this, don't throw anything away. Don't throw anything away. You never know when you come back to it where a line or an image or something might reveal itself in a new way to you, and that then all of a sudden you find that you're taking off with the language and expanding upon it. But it's not often, if they're this set, that I'm going to go back to it. But I will still revisit reams and reams of drafts, and if I find something, I might start to play with that and see if it's going to lead me somewhere and take me somewhere. Yes?
I had a question about teaching, because I think in this room there are a lot of people who were former teachers or who are teachers. Are you still inspired by teaching? Have you found that the students have changed, or have you changed?
All right, that's a double-edged question. Yeah, I could have retired years ago. And so when people say, what are you doing now? I say, I'm semi-retired. So I still teach a couple of courses a semester because it's in my blood and I enjoy it and I have fun. And I learn from my students as well. Students definitely are different. I don't want to go into a long diatribe, but the past year, I've been wrestling and trying to figure out what to do about this AI stuff. And you know, how can I set limits on it? How can I instill upon them that, of late, my emails back to them is, once I do a little bit of testing and I find out that they're using generative material that's really not apropos to it, I just send them an email back and say, look, I don't get paid to read a robot. You want to give me your voice? Give me your voice. I'm not grading this until, and I set that limit, I'm not grading this until I see your voice. And we talk, I find myself now in the beginning of a semester, every semester, because I teach primarily writing, whether it's just composition or research-based writing or creative writing. And I find myself now spending the first couple of classes trying to get them to think about having a program think for them. What does that mean? And I get in, I'm trying to talk about their humanity and talk about their feeling and what do they want, and our conversations about joy sometimes come with that and everything else. Yes, they've changed. And I don't want to disparage them, but this group that has just finished their first year, and they're the ones who started their high school on Zoom. So that's how they began. Need their hands held a lot. And they get frustrated with me because I often draw the line in the sand and say, you're a young adult, welcome to the world, you need to assert this. And they want you to tell them even the most basic things. Say, no, go forth, figure this out, do this. These are skills you're going to need that are important to being a human being. But yes, they've changed. They've changed. But I suppose that's to be expected. Anybody else?
Did you bring enough copies of your book for us to buy?
I got a dump truck outside. Yes, they're over on the table. I did, yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.